Hi, I'm T.R. Biddle. I'm a stained glass artist, and I'm here with one of my stained glass panels that I put in a picture frame and hung on the wall. It's not too interesting until you light it up. This wooden frame, which looks like an ordinary picture frame, is only 1.5 inches thick, but holds an edge-lit LED flat panel that is integrated behind the stained glass. It's a very even, bright light that really lets the glass shine. Plus, it's dimmable to adjust to the ambient light in the room. I'm really excited about the potential this way of displaying my stained glass offers in terms of marketing. I think it's going to allow me to place my stained glass in locations and outlets that otherwise wouldn't be able to display it properly. And for my customers, it's going to allow them to enjoy the stained glass day or night, on any wall, in any room, and it's going to be something that's easy for them to take with when they move. I really think that when people see stained glass displayed like this, they're going to start to consider it as a real alternative to other types of artwork that they might purchase to hang on the walls in their home. The purpose of this video is just to share with you some of what I've learned in my research on LED panels and in the process of designing and building the frame for this, so that if you want to do something like this with your own stained glass, you've got the information you need to get the job done. And that's whether you're doing it yourself or it's something that you want to have somebody else do for you. Hopefully, with the information I provide in this video, you will either know what you need to do or know what to tell somebody else who you're hiring to do the job for you. This did turn out to be a rather long video, so I have embedded a few chapter links in the video itself. Some viewers will allow you to skip ahead to the next section. Or if you're watching on YouTube, there are chapter links in the description section below. And then finally, I will be putting up a page that describes the different sections and the content covered in those sections, and giving a time code for the beginning of that section so you can fast forward if you want to. Okay, by way of introduction, I'd like to show you what I call the 4 critical components that are what I put together to make this backlit stained glass frame possible. The first thing is the LED panel. This is an edge-lit LED panel. As you can see, it's very thin. This particular panel is about 5/16 of an inch thick, a little less than 3/8 of an inch. It's lightweight, relatively economical. It's also dimmable. And it comes with a cord for plugging it into an external power supply. So it has this little cord that goes down to this particular panel, uses a 12-volt power supply. And there's what they call a barrel connector on the end of this. And so the second component is the power supply itself, which looks a lot like the power supply you might use with a laptop or other electronic component. And this is what they call a tabletop power supply. Most of these come with a barrel connector that plugs into the panel. And when you do that, and if the power supply were plugged into the wall, the panel would light up. Well, that plugging and unplugging the power supply may not be the best, most convenient way for you to operate the LED. Plus, there's no dimming when you plug the panel directly into the power supply. So the third component is some sort of a control to make dimming and on-off possible. This particular control is has just a rotary switch on it. You just rotate it until it clicks off, and then as you rotate it on, the panel will get brighter and brighter. And this just plugs in between the power supply and the panel, and that's all there is to it. So now if you plug this in, you've got a switch to control it, and you've got the light behind the stained glass. So the fourth component, all that you need is a frame that is going to hold both the panel and your stained glass, and hold them in such a way that it is easy to hang it up on the wall, and it's going to have adequate ventilation for the panel. And that's all there is to it, really. So the rest of this video is going to be looking in greater detail at these particular components, and also I'll share some information with you about options and alternatives that I discovered along the way as I was researching to find these components for my panel. There may be some variation that is, for some reason, more desirable for you, so I'm going to tell you a bit about what I learned for alternatives. So that's it in a nutshell. It's just 4 basic components. But before I start describing those, I'm going to give you the timeline I mentioned. So for those of you whose chapter markers aren't working, you'll have a time in the video to know where to skip ahead if you want to jump over a particular section. First, I'm going to start talking about the LED panel itself. This is an edge-lit LED panel. I'm going to describe how those are made and how they work so that you'll have a better understanding when we talk about options that you can specify when you're, or look for when you're go to purchase a panel. More specifically, in the options and alternatives section, I'll be talking about sources, prices, sizes, power supplies, color temperature, brightness, and diffusion. And bear in mind that these are the options and alternatives that I found available in February, March of 2018. So a year from now, these may not be valid. In the frame section, I'm just going to cover the basic design of the frame that I built, and then also talk about materials and resources that might be useful for those of you who are thinking of building your own frame. In the frame makers section, I talk with a couple of people who, if you were to take them your stained glass and the appropriate LED panel, they could make the frame and put the whole thing together for you. And then I conclude by going over why you might want to go with one or the other of these businesses in a particular situation. But I'd like to begin by taking a look at just exactly what an edge-lit LED panel is, basically how it's constructed and how it works. And here what you see is an LED strip, which is the light source in an LED panel, and is basically just a ribbon containing individual LED lamps. The LED strip is mounted in an aluminum channel that in turn makes up the frame for the LED panel. The aluminum frame then goes around a sheet of acrylic, and usually there's a reflector sheet on the back of that, as most of the LED panels are intended to illuminate just from one side and in one direction, though there are some that are designed to illuminate from both sides. They will not have a reflector sheet on the back. We're all familiar with the glare we sometimes see when sunlight strikes a polished surface like a window or a windshield. Even though the light is striking transparent material, a lot of it will bounce off because of the nature of that polished surface. And the same thing happens to light that is shined into an acrylic sheet, particularly because of the acute angle. A lot of it is bouncing around inside of the acrylic sheet and being transmitted through it, just like water is flowing through a pipe. We see bright, even illumination across the face of the LED panel because the surface of it has been etched with a grid pattern. And when light inside the acrylic sheet hits one of those grid lines, it gets diffused outward, and that's what we see as illumination. Some LED panels come with a diffusion layer that eliminates the grid effect, but some do not, and this is what an undiffused LED edge-lit panel looks like. Opalescent glass is fine on this grid, but cathedral and even model glass have a problem. So this is a good segue into the options and alternatives section. When you go shopping for an LED panel, what are your options going to be, and what issues should you be aware of? Search the internet for edge-lit LED panels, and you get a lot of hits that look like this. Really cheap, but not really useful for our purpose without some modifications. The majority of these panels made today are designed to replace traditional lighting sources in standard fixtures, such as ceiling lights and suspended ceilings. They're manufactured in a limited number of sizes, are sold with power supplies that are intended to be hardwired into a house circuit out of sight, and require dimmer switches that are most often manufactured to be installed in a wall. They're often thicker and heavier than the panels that I use. I haven't really looked too closely at adapting this type of panel because there's another type that's easy to use without modifications at all, just as it comes right out of the box. The type of panel I'm holding here is designed to provide backlighting and is probably most often used for signs or display fixtures. In this discussion, I'll refer to this type of panel as a backlight panel and the other panels as room light panels. Currently, spring 2018, most companies selling this type of panel only offer custom orders, but custom order does allow a number of options. To begin with, the panels can be ordered in any size you want, from 4 by 4 inches to several feet in each direction. Another option is the color temperature. You have a wide selection of color temperatures from very warm to very cool when you're custom ordering. You may even be able to get a variable temperature, white, or even RGB color LEDs that your customer can adapt to their exact preferences. It's a good idea to get your display panel before you build your stained glass so that you can use it when you're selecting your glass so that your colors work with the light, and to be certain that you've chosen a panel that's going to be bright enough for the glass you intend to use it with. Depending on the size and shape of the panel, you may be able to choose to have LEDs installed on 1, 2, 3, or all 4 sides of the panel. While manufacturers may suggest the LED configuration that's best for a particular size panel, you may specify something different. For instance, a 24 by 24 inch panel could be lit on one edge to achieve a fade across the panel. Lighting it on 2 opposite sides would produce a nice even light all the way across the panel. If you put LEDs on all four sides, then you're going to get the same nice even light, but it's going to be twice as bright. The number of sides with LEDs installed is obviously a big factor in determining the maximum brightness. The size of the panel, the color density and opacity of the glass, and the amount of ambient light in the room are all going to be factors in determining what maximum brightness is going to be required. Other factors influencing brightness are the quality and finish of the acrylic panel, the output of the LEDs, and the character of the diffusion grid that's etched into the panel. From some sources, this type of panel may be ordered either with or without a factory installed diffusion layer. Opalescent glass acts as its own diffuser, but other types of glass require a diffusion layer to eliminate the grid pattern that's in the acrylic layer. If you don't need a diffusion layer, you're better off without one, since it significantly reduces the light output of the panel. There are a number of materials that'll work as diffusers, ranging from simple tracing paper to regular diffusion filters designed to soften studio lights used in stage, photo, and video production. I found that translucent vinyl shower curtain liners are an inexpensive, efficient, and effective solution for diffusion. It's easy to find an appropriate power supply for backlit panels. If it doesn't come with one, then just ask the people selling the panel what you need. Since most of these panels are designed to be easy to use with tabletop power supplies, the exact supply you need should be readily available. As you've seen, it's easy to connect inline controls for on, off, and dimming. Very low-cost radio frequency controls allow complete control with a simple remote. Most of these inline controls use what's called PWM, or pulse width modulation circuitry, to control the illumination. Essentially, the LED is turned off and on very rapidly so that the light appears constant, but the percentage of the time that the light is on changes the perceived brightness of it. Most room light LED panels come with a power supply. Many have a power supply attached to the back of the panel, so though the main of the panel itself is thin, the attached power supply means a couple inches of space is required behind the panel. A frame thickness of about 3 inches would be the minimum in this case. Some of these panels now integrate the power supply into the panel frame, but this means a thicker and heavier panel. Some of the room lighting panels are designed to be used with an external power supply, but the supply that comes with the panel is not the familiar tabletop type, probably intended to be installed out of sight and not something that many people would be comfortable with exposed in their living rooms. It might be possible to find and purchase a tabletop power supply that would work, but on the other hand, it might be difficult or impossible to locate one of the correct type, which is to say either constant voltage or constant current, and the correct output for voltage and amperage. Also, when room light panels are advertised as dimmable, that most likely means the included power supply is wired to allow dimming through connection to a 0 to 10 volt dimming switch. This switch is typically connected to a power supply via a pair of wires. The bottom line is power and dimming are likely to be more of a problem with room light panels than with the backlight type. The only advantage room light panels have over the custom backlight panels is price. But here they have a big advantage. Because they're mass produced and offered with few options, they are a lot cheaper. For instance, a 2 by 2 foot room light panel can be had for less than $50, whereas ordering a single custom-made backlight panel of the same size would probably run around $250. Ordering a dozen would probably drop the price to $150. Remember, however, this is information based on my research and current only in early 2018, so your options may differ down the road. Also, there may be bargains to be found. I recently ordered a number of 18 by 24 backlight panels with power supplies offered as a stock item from NEMA.com. That's KNEMA.com, and got them for $68 each. Right now, they're listed on the website at $99 each, delivered with a quantity discount available. But I don't know how long they will be available at this price, or if this is something that NEMA is going to continue to carry as a stock item. As for where to buy your panels, I can only suggest the two companies that I've had any experience with, and those are NEMA and Feelis, FEELIS.com. Feelis is the Korean manufacturer of this type of panel with a sales office in LA. I'm frankly surprised that there aren't a number of companies selling this type of panel as a stock item and at a more reasonable price. NEMA has told me that most of their orders for these panels are for custom, one-of-a-kind, and apparently carrying stock sizes for them has not been real successful. So I guess I wouldn't assume continued availability. Hopefully someone will start offering these at a reasonable price in sizes that stained glass artists would be interested in using. Well, that about does it for options. To sum up, when ordering a custom panel, you'll have tremendous flexibility in size, color, temperature, LED configuration, and possibly other factors influencing maximum brightness. Plus the type of power and dimming control that you'll be able to use, and the type of diffusion if required. If purchasing room lighting type panels, you'll still want to consider all these factors in assessing how suitable a panel is for your application, but you'll have a lot fewer choices in what's available. In addition, you'll need to weigh the cost benefit against the limitations and potential difficulties in employing the room lighting panel versus the convenience of a backlight panel. So the frame is really a very simple item. The frame that accommodates the LED along with the stained glass is not much more than just a basic frame. But building it the way I did, at least from scratch, is not such a simple project if you don't have the tools and a certain amount of expertise to put it together. And it's really beyond the scope of this video to go over that process. But I will go over the basic construction, what it needs to look like, and I'll talk a little about some of the options for materials to make the frame building job a little easier, and also talk about having someone else make it for you and who might be available to do that kind of a project. If you're interested in learning to build a frame yourself, there are lots of videos online providing that instruction, or books at the library. Whether you want to work from scratch, as I did, or working with pre-made molding from a big box home improvement store, or using specifically designed and pre-finished framing stock that's available from a number of sources. I also investigated options for having a suitable frame built for you, and I'll share what I learned about that after taking a look at the basic construction of the frame. So this is the front of the frame, just 4 pieces of wood that have been mitered at the corners and then jointed together so that they'll hold the weight of the stained glass and the LED panel. And then these 4 pieces on the back were routed down with a router. And you can see this is a piece of the stock that I used to make this frame. And you can see here, let's see if I get there, you can see how it's just routed down so that route goes on the inside, and it will hold the stained glass, and it's routed to the depth and the width necessary to hold the stained glass panel. So you can see the glass just drops down into that routed out area and is pretty much flush with the back of the frame on the bottom. However, on the sides there is an addition, and that's what really differentiates this from just an ordinary picture frame. What I did was I took a couple rectangular strips of wood. There's one that goes up on this side, and there's another one that goes up on this side that space the back of the frame out from the wall. And the reason you want it spaced out, of course, is to allow your LED panel to be mounted on the back of the stained glass without pushing the frame away from the wall. Then, in order to hold everything together, I made some corner blocks. And so this is a corner block with the screws in it. And basically, I just made a couple little pieces of wood like this that are countersunk. And so that's this pair of wooden blocks here. And they go on the corner like this. And there's a very thin sheet of brass that goes over the top of them, and that's what holds the panels in place where it cuts across the corner. This is 1/100th inch thick brass. There's a little piece of weather strip on here that gives a little compression, and since the holes that I drilled in the wooden blocks were countersunk, when I drive these screws into the back of the wooden frame, the brass is thin enough that it kind of molds into that countersunk hole. So the screws are fairly flush with the back of the brass plate when this is all assembled. The frame, being made out of solid wood, takes the screws very nicely and holds them very well, so that there are no issues with the panels coming out. And since they're screws, they can be removed if you want. So it's possible to remove the corner blocks. You can take out the stained glass and put in a different panel if you want to. So that makes the frame pretty versatile if you have stained glass panels that are of the same size. Then I put hanger wire across the back, just ordinary picture frame hanging wire. And I did put a couple of little felt discs on the bottom corners of the frame to rest against the wall to keep the frame from scratching the wall. And that's all there is to it. So I've got my 4 corner blocks in place, and I'm just sending home the last of these screws. And there you have it. My panel is framed and ready to be hung on the wall. Now, if you've never tried to make a picture frame, you might be asking, oh, what's so hard about that? And the answer is that it requires perfection in the lumber that you're using and in the cut of the miter joint and the lengths of the sides. Everything has to be perfectly precise, or you're not going to get nice looking miters on the corners. But let's assume that your framing stock is perfectly square and perfectly dimensioned, that you've cut everything to an exact length, and that your miters are just the epitome of perfection. Then you've got the problem of joining your sides together and joining them with enough strength that they're going to be able to support the weight of the stained glass plus the LED panel. If you are using unfinished lumber, then maybe you can put some nails in there and some glue and get joints that are going to do the job. But if you have decided to use picture frame stock, and particularly pre-finished picture frame stock to get a nice looking frame, then you may have problems because normally a picture frame shop will form those joints using special tools, and it's done from behind so that it's not visible. You can't just put a nail into the side of that nice stock without having that show. So you need to think about how you're going to make those joints. My point is that making a simple frame is not a trivial proposition unless you have the proper equipment to do it. And you may want to think about having somebody else do that work for you. And I'll take a look at a couple of options in that regard in a minute. But first, I'm going to mention one possible solution that may work for some of you in some situations, and something that I'm probably going to use as an alternative to making my own frames for a number of pieces that I will be producing. As I mentioned earlier, I bought a number of 18 by 24 inch LED panels that I got at a real good price, intending to use those to make some autonomous stained glass pieces. And about every other week, Jerry's Artorama or Dick Blick is sending me out a flyer advertising frames on sale at 60 or 70% off. So I thought I'd purchase a couple of those and see what I could do with those for framing my stained glass, because as it happens, 18 by 24 is one of the standard sizes for these pre-made frames. And I was able to buy a couple for $40 a piece. So I'm going to show you what I was able to do with those. Now that $40 a piece was the sale price. These normally sell for 70 something, I guess. But here's from the front. This is a 3.5 or 3.25 inch wide frame. A reasonable finish, nicely molded. It's not a great frame, but it's acceptable, I would say, for my purposes. And then here's the back. Not quite as pretty, but one of the key things that I was looking for in the frame was how deeply it was routed. This particular frame, the depth of the route is 9/16 of an inch, which is more than enough for the stained glass panel, and also will accommodate a bit of the LED panel as well. Different frames are routed to different depths, and I would suggest looking for something at least 9/16 of an inch deep. There didn't seem to be as much variation in the width of the route. This is a 1/4 inch, so there's a pretty minimal amount of leeway on the sides. So you better be pretty accurate when you size your stained glass, or otherwise you're going to wind up not having it fit the way you'd like it to fit. When I make my own frames, I give myself a 1/2 inch of width in that route so that I have a little more leeway in the fit. And also, I like to frame in 3/4 inch wide zinc border, so I get a 1/2 inch overlap on that 3/4 inch zinc, and that gives me a nice little 1/4 inch reveal. With this frame, a little more reveal of the border than I'd like, but it's still workable. With these frames, 18 by 24 meant that the opening on the back of the frame was 18 and an eighth by 24 and an eighth, so that artwork sized exactly to 18 by 24 will drop in very comfortably. Now, when I made my own frame, I was able to add spacers on the side that allowed me to make the frame so that it would hang flat against the wall. Those spacers were able to accommodate the depth of the LED panel that went on the back. And you may be able to find pre-made frames that are routed deeply enough that you would also have that accommodation. By having it spaced out on the sides like that and not on bottom and top, one additional thing that I was afforded was an airflow over the back of the panel, which allowed for heat dissipation from that aluminum channel that held the LEDs. The LEDs don't get real hot, but if they're not ventilated in some way, the heat is going to build up. And I suspect it's not going to get hot enough to start a fire, but what it will do is shorten the life of your LED bulbs. I think you may have them burn out before they start a fire, but you're putting that panel in there with an expectation of 50,000 hours of service. And when LEDs get hot, you're going to dramatically shorten the life. So you don't want to bury the frame in a way that it's not going to have at least some ventilation. I'm not going to have that problem with these with the frames that are routed to 9/16 inch, and I'll show you why. So we'll do a little math here. Into this 9/16 deep route, I put my stained glass panel, and the zinc border on that, once you get solder beads on either side of that zinc, it's going to take up about 7/16 depth in there. And then I have my LED panel, which is 5/16 plus 1/16 for a diffusion layer. And what all that adds up to is that it's going to extend about a 1/4 inch behind the back of the frame. So I have 2 little squares of plywood that brass strip is screwed onto there. And that's 1/4 inch plywood, which brings the surface of those pieces flush with the back of the LED panel. Then there's a brass strip, just 1/100th of an inch thick, screwed into those little plywood pieces. And then that black square top center is a felt pad, which adds a little more thickness but protects your wall. So what all this adds up to is that in back of the frame, we're spaced out about 3/8 of an inch, which gives us some airflow. So that's one reason why this particular depth is a good one to work with, because you're much less likely to have to worry about heat building up. So when hung on the wall, the frame, to me at any rate, looks just like a normal picture frame. And that little 3/8 inch space out really is not noticeable. And particularly because this is a kind of a wide frame, when you view even from an acute angle, you are not seeing anything behind the frame. So for me, this pre-made frame solution is a pretty good one. As far as construction goes, it couldn't be much simpler. You're just going to do this in each of the four corners, and that's it. The only tools you need are a screwdriver, a drill, and a pair of scissors would do to cut the brass if you don't have a pair of tin snips. And then you have to cut up the little plywood squares. But that's all there is. Because I'm intending to do a series of panels similar to this one, the pre-made frame solution is a really good one for me, because I knew I was going to make a series of panels this size. I was able to order a quantity of LED panels and get them consequently at a very attractive price. And since the frame size is a stock size, I can order frames and I can get a few different styles and a variety of finishes to put these pieces in and give my customers some options when they're choosing their piece. If they like a particular stained glass piece, but they don't like the frame it's in, I can switch the frame for them. And really, I can get something else entirely for them if they don't like anything that I've selected. So the pre-made frame solution is going to work out really well for me. My total investment in the frame and the light is only going to be just a little over $100. Obviously, though, this solution has its limitations. There are not going to be pre-made picture frames made to fit every size of a stained glass panel. And so if making your own picture frame is beyond your skill set, then having a frame custom made is going to be your only option. And there are several avenues that you could go down for getting custom made frames, but a couple of those are to work with a local picture framer, and the other is to work with a cabinet making shop. So I went out and talked to a couple of guys in these businesses, and that's what I'll share with you now. So one of your options, if you're not interested in building a frame for yourself, is to go to a frame shop, and I'd suggest maybe looking for an independent frame shop where they might be a little more flexible in what they can do. Right now I'm at DuPage Frame Center with Bob Green.
Yes.
And Bob has taken a look at what I did with the frame and has suggested a couple of options that he thinks would work. And in fact, what Bob is suggesting is that if I were to come in with the stained glass and the appropriate size LED panel, that he could take care of things from there. He has solid wood frames that are routed deeply enough to accommodate both the stained glass and the LED panel, and tons of different styles. So there are going to be a lot of options for you. This here looks a lot like the frame that I made, and these will drop in and look very nice from the front of the frame, and there's solid enough in the back of the frame to hold the corner blocks that position and retain the glass and the LED panel. Maybe you could say a couple words, Bob, about the options and pricing.
Well, the frame pricing is going to vary. We could do a modest wood solid. We only sell solid wood frames, no plastic or MDF. Would start around, I'd say 175 would be out the door. We include all the extra time to incorporate that to make room for the power supply cord, so it drops out of there. Framing, as you get into more intricate stuff, which you may want, could go, up 50, 60, $200 more. But once someone sees what they like, they generally go spend a little bit more if that's really what they want. But we do have low-end stuff if that's, you just want to get something up on the wall and it will look good. It's not going to fall apart.
Okay. Very good. Thanks a lot, Bob.
You're welcome.
Appreciate your help with
Appreciate
this.
the opportunity.
Okay, I'm here at Jim's Custom Woodworking in LaFox, Illinois, with Jim Stalen, who's a custom woodworker. And he's taken a look at our frame here and said that he can replicate that, do exactly the same thing for us. And he can offer several options about the way this is finished. So you want to tell us a little bit, Jim, about what you can do for someone?
Sure. These frames are pretty straightforward. They can be done in many different types of wood, from exotic woods to your regular walnuts and birch and maple and so on. Plus, we can also offer different styles on the frame itself as far as the detail is concerned.
For instance, prairie style or Victorian or just a plain, simple modern, you can...
Sure. The options are endless. It really depends on how much money somebody wants to spend on something like that. A simple frame can range from $150 all the way up to $400, depending on the style and the wood and that people choose. And we can even offer unfinished versions as well if they want to finish it themselves to save some cost. So options are endless.
Terrific. So essentially, if they bring in the stained glass panel and the appropriately sized LED panel, you can take care of the rest of it, and the job will be finished.
Sure. We can definitely take it from beginning to end.
Great. Thanks, Jim.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So either of these guys could do a great job of putting a frame together for you. Jim, if you had a particular finish that you wanted to match or a particular type of wood, and especially if there were existing trim in a room or furniture that you wanted to match with the frame, he'd be the guy that could do that job for you. And he would also be able to build the panel right into a cabinet that he'd be making for you, or build into a wall for that matter. On the other hand, Bob has got a whole wall full of different frame types, from very simple to very elaborate and exotic frames. And there are samples of all of those that you can actually fit up against your panel and get a feel for how a frame of those materials would work. So for yourself, either of these guys could do the frame, but I think the real advantage to establishing a relationship with both of these guys is for you to have someone that you know and can depend on, that you can send your customers to, and let them deal with the framing part of the job directly with the customer, so that the customer is going to get exactly what they want from the person who's going to do the job for them. Even though for my autonomous panels, I'll be managing the frames myself, whether it's building them or using the pre-made frames. When I am commissioned to do a panel, and if my customer wants it framed with an LED, I'm going to be sending them either to Bob or Jim to take care of that end for me, because I'd rather be working with glass. Well, that's about all that I have to share with you regarding LED panels and incorporating those into a frame with your stained glass. And hopefully, I know this went on a bit and probably said more than I needed to for most of you, but hopefully I haven't left too many questions unanswered, and you'll find something useful in what I've been able to share. Thanks for listening.